not only am I going to be going over the methodology behind how to start plants from seeds, but also we're going to be planting some right now, because right now is the time you want to start planting tomato seeds if you want your tomatoes to be the size that you buy from the greenhouse by the time May comes around. So a lot of people ask me when you're starting plants from seeds, like, why would you give a workshop on this? Well, there's a difference. Anyone can plant a seed in the ground, but there's a difference between getting plants like these and putting them in the ground in May and getting plants like these. What I'm going to be teaching you today is how to definitely get plants like these, and not only for the tomato, but also looking at watermelons, melons, cucumbers, beans, peas, lettuce, carrots, radishes. So not only the seeds you have now, but also plants that are very closely related to the seeds you have now, so the care requirements kind of just spill over to the same group of plants. But the most important thing I want to go over first of all, my most important rule of vegetable gardening, and especially starting plants from seeds, is to keep it simple. Because you can technically start everything in your garden inside the home in a pot at a certain time of the year, but you will go insane trying to keep everything watered and keep everything repotted and keep everything the best it should be. And there are actually a lot of vegetables you can plant outside very easily, and planting them outside will not affect how many beans or how many peas or however many, whatever you want, you get at the end of the season. So overall, keep it simple. If you don't need to start things inside, don't. But tomatoes and a few of the others we'll be covering today are definitely things you want to start inside. So I'm going to be going over our materials for success, talking about what's in front of you right now and what are the pros and cons of different things that you can use. How to start from seed, tomato, pepper, eggplant, cucumber, melon, squash, all those groups, including pumpkins, carrots, lettuce, radishes, beans, and peas. And also a little thing called hardening off, which if you haven't heard of that before, it's very, very the most important thing you could probably know when it comes to starting seeds indoors. If you have heard of it, you're probably cringing just hearing it because it is such a pain in the butt. And finally, common problems that a lot of people come across when doing these things from seeds, because it is, I've raised a lot of plants. Starting some of these plants from seeds can be some of the most irritating, hardest things to grow. But if you know how to do it right, it can be very simple. So before I get started on our materials for success, I'm going to get you guys to start putting soil in your plant pots, because before you ever start putting seeds in soil, you have to make sure the soil is wet before you do that. Because you can make it wet afterwards, but it gets to be a pain, because dry soil doesn't take up water very well. And so you put your seeds in your little bowl, you cover it up, you pour some water on top, all the soil floats to the top, all the seeds you just planted float to the top, and you plant more than one pot, that gets really annoying really fast. So there's two seeds floating around. There we go. And this soil is fresh out of the bag, so it should be fairly moist. So what you want to do is put it in your 6 little cells that you have in front of you, and then put some water in the base of the tray, around the base of your pot. And because this is a, this is actually a surprise, but it's kind of a peat pot, it will take the water up and make your soil wet without having to water it on the top. Well, this is actually why I definitely want to do this with you guys, because a lot of people put too little or too much. You want to leave about 1 centimeter at the top in case you do want to water the top. The water is somewhere to sit while you're watering it. And a lot of people say don't push the soil down, blah, blah, blah. Push it down so it's firm, but don't squish it as hard as you possibly can. Don't leave it loose, because a lot of the small seeds you put in, it can be a pain if you lose them and they float around when you're watering them. So really squish it down there. Make sure it's firm, but don't turn it into a brick while you're squishing it. If anyone has any questions, just call me around and I'll come help you.
How high up are we planting?
Put about 1 centimeter between the top of your soil and the top of the plant. Just so if you do want to water from the top, you can do it easily. Now, sorry your trays are so big, it's actually impossible to find apparently 40 12-inch plastic trays, but those are actually good because if you want to put more seeds in there, you have more space. And also it'll help us keep the soil off the tables we realize. Yeah. Oh yeah, that's my materials for success. Yeah, so as soon as you get why I'm getting you to do this now is so that the soil will have a chance to get wet before I have you put in the tomato seeds in. Hopefully. So as soon as someone has their soil in their trays, raise your hand, I'll come around with the water and we'll start moisturizing that stuff. I'm sorry it's cold, it was in my car, I didn't anticipate going down to apparently winter again, unfortunately. Stick it down like that. So when you water it, it's not floating all over the place.
Okay, I'm done.
Yeah, well, it's sorry the soil's kind of chunky. I think it froze a little bit in my car. But break up the chunks that you can and just push the top down lightly with the top of your hand so that it's nice and flat. Because when some of these seeds you're going to be putting down are very, very tiny. You tend to lose them when there's a lot of ground or air floating on the surface. It's all very aesthetic, but you'll save yourself some hassles along the way.
Is everybody on soil?
Yeah? Okay. So angry right now.
Oh, yeah, that's cool. Oh, it looks pretty.
Top off.
You just pour it right in the tray and around.
Yeah, right in the tray first because it kind of speeds it up, and then around because it'll soak it up in the bottom. And don't be shy. It'll soak up a lot, trust me.
How much water should I do?
You want to get it as wet, as like good, nice wet as possible. So ideally they say if you took a handful of it and squeezed it out, you get a little few drops of water like a sponge. Some water going around here. Sorry, I'm gonna. Hope no one more wet here today. Oh, sorry.
And it won't be a problem carrying these out in the cold, because I have a half an hour walk back tonight.
No, while they're still in the seed stage, they don't care. As far as the seeds are concerned, they're still dormant.
Okay.
And I'll give you some top water. This is the only annoying part. I was really hoping the soil would come out of these packages wetter than this, but it's getting a little wet to start. Yeah, fill the top. We're trying to speed it up. This speeds it up, although if you were trying to get it all wet just by watering on the top, you would drive yourself crazy. Just speed things up a bit until you kind of plug this in. Yeah. What these pots do, why they're awesome, is they actually take the water on the base and suck it up into the soil. So the magic of adhesion. Everyone has soil? Yes, I do. There is, and I think we're making another trip back to this.
She was watering it from under.
I have water here.
She was watering it
Oh,
from
good, okay. I'll grab that one next, because I think there's
Because they told me to put in bottle
a
water.
little less precise water in the jug.
And it's right there, I brought a bottle for water.
Bottle what?
I brought something for water.
Oh, for water.
This red habit.
Yeah. They can't really get too wet at this stage, so don't worry about it, because the plants aren't usually there.
You just feel like kindergarten?
What are those finger paints?
Come on.
Start, some
I watered some from the top.
vegetables, but we have a lot of.
There's always one, eh?
Oh, we're gonna add to the dishwashing.
You got some?
I think it's okay.
She's watering it from the top.
Yeah.
Oh, is she? Oh, I thought I saw watering from the bottom.
She does both.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Where we can get them.
I have an entire catalog. They do a release every couple of years. You get it off Amazon. There's all the early seed producers in North America. And they just actually not by the producers by variety. So you go to the tomato chapter. I'm going to everything vegetables on that catalog name. But they list like you know, tomatoes and they'll have all the different varieties of black tomato. And they'll be like 200 different varieties of black tomato that you've never even heard of. And they'll tell you where you can order the seeds from in North America, which is fantastic. If you really seriously want to get into this. Everyone have a good amount of water, things are getting wet, soaking.
What do you think we want? Think we need more?
Oh, you're doing pretty good.
Oh, okay.
This is your first lesson in getting soil wet. It takes longer than you want.
Is it too dry?
No, that should be good. That's good. Yeah, but for our purposes right now, that's good. Okay.
So all the information she's talking about where to get seeds, I'll also send that and put it on the blog.
I'm just gonna see if I can turn the light off just here so you can wrong one.
Ha, there we go. Okay. So now that you're sitting in front of you, I'm first going to talk about what kind of materials you can use during this process and make your life a lot easier or a lot harder, because you'll be taking care of these plants over 2 to 3 months, and you're not just going to be growing 1 tomato. Let's face it, if you want to grow tomatoes, you're going to be growing 5 or 10. So any little inconvenience can quickly become a large inconvenience when you're doing things over 2 or 3 months. So even though these things may seem kind of trivial, over the long term they can really add up. The soil, the thing that's going to have the biggest impact on whether the seed you plant turns out this scraggly little thing you plant in May or it turns into a large plant that already has flowers on it, is your soil. And there's a big difference between soils that are used for seedlings and soils that are used for regular potted plants. And whenever you buy soil, make sure you always get, if you're starting seeds, seedling specific mix. Like if you read on the front of your Miracle-Gro, it's specifically for starting seeds. These seedlings are very, very delicate, and most potting mixes that you get are loaded with fertilizer because the plant, they presume, is going to be sticking in that pot for like 10 years between the time it takes you to repot it. It's going to need a lot of fertilizer. That great amount of fertilizer is actually too much for little seedlings. They'll sprout, and they will pretty much, most of them die from the overabundance of fertilizer. So if you look at this seed starter fertilizer, they very happily advertise a low amount of fertilizer in them, and that's actually a good thing. Now for years, ProMix, if anyone's familiar with this was the industry standard for starting seeds. Everyone used ProMix. I mean, it had Pro right in the name. I used it for years, until one year I ran out of ProMix and had to use some of my Miracle-Gro seeding soil that I had hanging around, and it was just like one of those Miracle-Gro commercials, you know, when like the Miracle-Gro plant is like twice as big as the other plant. So I've never gone back to ProMix since, and that's why I've given you guys the Miracle-Gro seed starter, because it really has the best impact on seedling growth that I've found. Now pots can also make your life easy or hard. Plastic pots that you buy the plants in at a garden center, I really don't recommend using those. Number one, the plastic really restricts root growth, which if you're starting seedlings will have a big impact on how much it grows in that 2 months where you're trying to get it as big as possible. Because the pot really restricts the roots, all they can do is grow round and round and they don't really reach their full potential. Also, it can be a lot more irritating to water plants in plastic pots, because you look at your pots right now, there's water at the bottom of the tray, it's soaking up the pot, it's getting your soil wet automatically, you don't have to do anything. Physics is taking its course. If you have plastic pots, you pretty much have to water each individual pot, which can really add up if you have 20 or 30 plants. Now I also really prefer the compostable pots because they're much more environmentally friendly and they're much easier to handle in the long term. Because in the end, basically at the end of your growing season, you don't have to take each plant out of a pot and put it in the ground. You can stick the entire pot right in the ground. It's a lot better for the plant too because you're not disturbing the roots. Especially for certain groups of vegetables like cucumbers and melons and squash, they do not like to have their roots disturbed. And these pots are really great because you can stick them right in the ground. You don't have to touch any of their roots. It's much less stressful for the plant. But not all compostable pots are created equal, and I just want to go over them a little bit because I want to explain why the pots that you have in front of you are so special right now. The ones you'll see in most garden centers are peat pots. Peat pots are great because they are very commonly available. They compost very easily, but they're really bad for the environment because the only way we get peat pots is by pulling peat out of wetlands, which essentially destroys the wetland. So even though it is a big industry in Quebec, I really don't recommend getting them. And there are other methods people use, like you'll see people making pots out of newspapers, which is great for recycling, but the plants actually can take up chemicals from the ink in the newspaper that leaches into the soil. So for a lot of plants, I don't recommend it, especially leafy plants, because when plants sequester toxins, they tend to do it in the leaves. So if you're like eating a lettuce, you're eating where the plant sequesters the toxins, so it's not that great. And coconut fiber pots, these are the kind of fibers you'll see in those hanging baskets where they have kind of peatish looking thing at the bottom. That's actually coconut fiber. It is harvested sustainably, it's a good industry, but they're more expensive and they're harder to find. These pots I discovered at the seed exchange at the Botanical Gardens this February, and I was really, really happy to see them because they are made in Ontario. What they are is it's composted cow manure formed into pots. So it's no longer poop, it will not smell like poop, but it's taking a waste product from agriculture that we already have way too much of and making something really, really useful out of it. It also has fertilizer built right into the sides of the pot because it is composted manure technically, so it's much better for your plants. And actually I found this adorable little photo online. That's a regular peat pot, and this is a cow pot. You can see all the roots actually growing out the side of the pot because the plant is so healthy. It has just so many roots, and the more roots you can get from a plant when you're growing it, the better it's going to do no matter what. You can. I brought some pamphlets to hand around to everyone. Their new office in Quebec is in Dorval, so I stopped by and I just got some in Dorval. But they sell them at Green Barn Nursery and a few other retailers, and they're starting to sell them more and more in Quebec. They just came into Quebec, they're from Ontario. So you can find them online, and they're really, really very helpful. Another thing that is crucial for success is sunlight, but probably not in the way you're thinking. It's not necessarily intensity, like they have to be near a really sunny window versus a not sunny window. It actually has a lot more to do with how high the light is above the plants. When you get these leggy little ridiculous looking seedlings, when they sprout, they're like, where's the sunlight? And your sun is so far from the window, they actually will grow as long as they can to try to reach the sunlight until they kind of run out of resources and just kind of give up. And then at that point, your stem will be like this long and your two little leaves will be at the end. So especially for tomatoes, what you should do if you really want to do these guys properly and make your life easier is have a plant light and start it even just this much above the soil. Because the seedlings will come out like this, and they'll be like, oh my god, the light's right there. And the stem will get about this tall, and you'll start getting all your leaves, and you'll end up with this stout little thick-stemmed plant. Now I know not everyone has a plant light, so I also have a recommendation when I start talking about tomatoes. For taking plants like this and still making a nice stem plant out of them. But if you do want to do this in the long term, you'll make your life so much easier just to get a plant light at a place like Canadian Tire and have that in your house. You can stack books on either side like they've done here to raise and lower the sides. It can be very, very low tech. Another thing is water. Seedlings are environmental stressor wusses. They do not handle drought or any loss of moisture. They do not handle cold temperatures very well. So when you have your seedlings, especially when they're small, you gotta make sure they're always being watered. And that's not the reason why these pots are great. It's so easy to water them. And a lot of people actually try to get around this by making little greenhouse domes over their seeds because it keeps the moisture in and it prevents you from having to water them. But then you have to deal with taking the lid off and the plants being like, oh my god, my humidity is no longer 100%. So it actually may make more problems in the long term. But either way, you really have to watch to make sure your plants are always wet. And you'll notice when they're dry, because unlike other plants where they'll be dry and they'll lose a leaf or two, your seedling will just collapse. And if you catch it early enough, you can usually still water them and revive them, but it's definitely something you really have to watch. And finally, second to last, temperature. As I said before, seedlings are big temperature wusses. I remember the first year I started my seedlings, I had them in my bedroom. My boyfriend decided to just put the window open a crack overnight because he thought it was really warm in the room. And I woke up in the morning, and all these plants I'd spent a month growing were all wilted, and I almost had a panic attack. And it was just this tiny little breeze from this crack in my window that had wilted them all. Thankfully, I moved them away from there, and they all revived, and my boyfriend got to live another day. But even the slightest bit of cold temperatures when they're very young can be enough to just knock them off their feet. And also, some plants actually need certain temperatures to germinate successfully, but I'll get to that a little later on when I'm talking about your individual seeds. And finally, the most important thing, seeds. In order to have a lot of success, you really need to know where you're getting your seeds from. And number one thing is most people don't realize the seeds actually expire. Most of the vegetable seeds we've had have been bred for over the past 1,000 years to only really last one season. So most of them don't maintain viability year after year after year, especially like corn. Corn only lasts 1 year. You do not plant corn the next year, most of the seeds will lose their ability to germinate. But they still look the same. So most people don't notice, and if you check in garden centers, each seed package actually has an expiry date on the back. And if you read the expiry date, a lot of them will be selling expired seeds. And some of them will still germinate, but your percentage, which is really important, will drop by a half. So instead of 80% germination in your bean seeds, you only have 40, which can be a lot. So you'll notice the seed packages you have here don't have expiry dates on them. That is because a lot of heirloom seed packages, depending on what company you get, don't necessarily report the germination date. But these were from very recent sellers, so I'm hoping they're all in good health. And anyway, beans and tomatoes tend to hold their viability over several years, unlike poor corn, which is very bad at that. I'm also going to show you in this presentation some places you can continue to get heirloom seeds if you're interested. I'll be honest, because I had to get such a large number for everyone here, I actually resorted to eBay, but surprisingly enough, there are a lot of people who have their own heirloom gardens and collect seeds and then make a profit on the extra seeds they collect by selling them through eBay to other people. It's actually a very large heirloom community on eBay, which I think that's hilarious. Now we're gonna get to planting these seeds. We're gonna be starting today with tomato, and this is the one that's the most important to start right now. This is actually the time to start your tomatoes. The tomatoes are in the same family as eggplants and potatoes. Now potatoes you don't start from seed unless you're a breeder, but eggplants we start from seed, and they also have very similar requirements to green sweet peppers. So the big bell peppers that you have in the store. So anything I'm telling you here for tomato will also apply to eggplant and sweet peppers. These are the earliest seeds to start that you could start in your vegetable garden. And they're also the most energy intensive. That's not necessarily because they're very complicated, but it's because you'll be taking care of them for like 2 months. So it can add up the kind of care they need. So why do we start them so early? Because people want them looking like that when they come from the greenhouse. And that's the plant has just started producing flowers, it's big and healthy, and it takes a little tiny tomato seed, minimum 2 months, 3 months to reach that stage. And that is with the proper care, because you can't put a seed in the ground right now and that's in your pot right now and ignore it, and it probably will be long and leggy and about this big when you put it in your plants. So, I'm going to talk about this first and then we're going to get to planting our tomato seeds. The big thing about tomatoes is the light, because you're going to get that long leggy plant if you can't get the light close enough. So if you really want to do this properly, get a plant light and start it as close to above the top of your pots as possible, so within like 2 to 3 inches, but even if you don't, I'll get to that on the next slide, how we can prepare that. But tomatoes don't really care about the temperature, they're pretty cold tolerant. I've started them in my garage when it's been about 15 degrees Celsius in there, and they've been perfectly happy under a light. You have to make sure you start them in late March if you really want them to be garden center size by the time you put them in your garden. So, everyone, if you want to take out your tomato seeds now, so if you wanted to start them today, but here's your opportunity to. You have 12 hours on, 12 hours off. Yeah, that's the thing. A lot of people buy plant lights and they put them on and they're like, oh, it'll be on forever and it'll be fine. I was also like that, but tomatoes can't handle that. They start to burn and they won't grow. They actually have this little freak out if they have 24-hour light. They really need that 12-hour on, 12-hour off daylight cycle. So tomatoes are they're the standard seed when you plant them. You just make a little hole in the center of your pot, only about 1 centimeter down, like the tip of your finger. You want to stick not just 1 seed, but 2 or 3. And a lot of people just stick 1, and because they feel bad if more of these. What happens? You want to put 3 because you want the first plant to come up. That's your strongest plant. The 2 others might still come up, but you want to pull those because those aren't the strongest plants, and you only want 1 plant per pot. A lot of people feel bad pulling out little seedlings because you've got them to germinate and you feel proud. Don't. They're smaller plants and they will always be more work to keep growing compared to your strongest plant, which was the first one that came up. And that's actually how we selected for strong plants over the long term as breeders. So don't feel too bad. I'm sorry you only have 5 seeds per sampler, but in order to get this many varieties, that's what we had to get.
The brand?
Yeah. You can put 2 to 3 in each. You can try and put in 1 in each if you like. I don't recommend it, but considering how few tomato seeds we have, that's an idea.
Maybe just cover it.
The brandy wine is
Green velvet and red pear, those are.
Yeah. Everything that's a tomato is kind of rounded, but
Sure.
So these
the ones that are oval and larger are
Which one is that? The smaller one? Yellow tumbler?
I'll keep it. This is
red
that's definitely small.
Are there those?
Some
So
is
then,
also like.
like this, if I just hand it.
Yeah, now cover it lightly with soil.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and you don't want to put them down too deep, tomatoes,
one
believe
that
it or
is
not.
cherry and one that's
Yeah.
that is bigger.
Yeah, and just cover them lightly with soil and they're good.
Do the cherry tomato at the same time?
Yeah, do the cherry and the regular tomato.
Which is the cherry tomato?
I would do 2. You can choose to do 1 if you want to try to maximize how many you get. Because you have, the other cells that you have, you can plant some other things you'll be talking about today. As I said, you can start everything indoors. I don't recommend it. So if you want to leave some of your cells to plant your melon today maybe, or your beans and try that out, you can leave that too. So these 6 cells are up to you for what you want to put in now. But if you are planning on having tomatoes, I recommend starting now.
What was that one called?
Yeah, you you have a cherry and a regular size. So this red pear is a cherry sized tomato. It's actually cute little, they're shaped like a pear. They're pretty silly looking.
Okay.
Of these,
Yeah.
which is the Oxheart and the San Marzano.
Oxheart is definitely regular size, so the San Marzano I'm gonna guess is cherry.
I think San Marzano is my big, because I have a rare black cherry, is my cherry tomato.
I'm gonna Google it right now, and I'm gonna look at my list on my computer and just double check.
Christie, we do different, like a red pear and
Yeah, because you should have one cherry tomato and one regular tomato.
yellow orange banana.
Big one.
A brand new one is a small.
Big one. Yep, actually,
Orange
be
bananas look
surprised, it's usually better for
crazy.
seeds to
I
plant
just Googled
shallower
them
as
and
opposed to
they're
deeper, because there's less soil for them to push up through, and because they're not being exposed to the wilds of the outdoors, there's not a lot to knock them over or harm them, so it's actually better for them to be closer to the surface. It's easier for them to germinate, and there's more soil underneath them to, where they can put their roots down into, so I'm just
Should we
gonna put some-
label? Should we put labels to, like, theoretically?
Where's my San
Yeah.
Marzano?
Okay.
Where's that?
So what you can do is you can even just put the little plastic bags on top of the soil right now,
Okay.
so you can put a label in them when you get home. So I'm just going to pull up the list of cultivars. Okay, so the cherries are sun gold, red tumbler, red pear, rare black cherry, and yellow tumbler. All the others are big tomatoes.
Okay, so the tumbler yellow.
Did everybody get that?
You have too small?
Anything that has the word pear or cherry or the sunburst gold.
They're
But those are the cherries. Everything else is big. There's about 15 of the others, so I'm not going to go through them all. You'll get a list of exactly what they are in the email. Sorry?
Is that tomatoes?
Yeah, big one.
big jalapeno.
That's a melon.
Oh.
Yeah, we will get to that one.
Can I get some big tomato ones?
Oh yeah, you have two melon. That's where the other melon went.
You can have half of mine. I have
Does
the
anyone
orange banana.
I have an extra tomato, but no melon.
The two I gave you were big
I have an
tomatoes.
extra tomato here.
Are they?
There you go.
Oh, not these.
Is anyone
Thank you.
missing a melon? You have one extra or? Nope. Okay. I guess somebody didn't show up. It's okay. So I'm just gonna wait until everyone goes through their seats. So each of the things surprisingly is actually important to the seed. Like you want to make sure with tomato you're about 1 centimeter deep, no deeper, or it's going to take longer for them to germinate, and some of them might struggle, believe it or not. You definitely want to make sure that you're watching the light, and if you know the light is going to be far, that you know what to do once your little plants come out a little bit leggy. And you want to make sure you definitely start in
Did I
March, because I
step
started later, and they don't get as big as you'd like. But when I put them in my garden, I want to make sure they're starting to get little flowers on them, and even tiny little tomatoes. I'm really picky.
Do you start your light, if you have a plant light, before it even comes out of the soil?
The light actually stimulates the seeds to start germinating, even though you think they can't see the light because they're all the way under the soil. There seems to be an effect on them. So you're having it about, but like this, when you start to see the seeds come up, you can then start moving them up. Because as soon as your seedlings come out, they'll have their first 2 little leaves, and when they open them like this, that usually means they're like, oh my god, the sun, and they're not going to start moving up. They'll grow a little bit, but they'll start to grow new leaves, and the new leaves are what's going to make them grow taller, and you'll be moving the light up
Okay.
as they grow.
So I got 5 tomato seeds and suppose they all grow.
Mhm.
Can I then transplant them to another little
That's
pot
the
like
game?
that?
Yeah, well, I'm
Oh,
gonna actually,
okay.
transplanting is on my next slide.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
I'm gonna talk about transplanting tomato, because you're gonna be having these for so long. Tomato are really the ones that you're gonna have to worry about transplanting, not for any of the other ones. Okay, so your seeds are gonna germinate within about 2 weeks, and if you have planted more than 1 seed in a pot, I know you're gonna feel bad, I usually feel bad when I do this, but cut those little weak ones that came up later, because they're just really in the way, you can't really transport them to another pot, and they were already weaker than the first ones that came up anyway. You always have, some are fun to have that small plant in the the garden that doesn't do as well as all the other plants next to it. Okay, so as I mentioned, sorry, it's kind of squished back here. Slowly raise the plant light as the plant grows. And when the plant has a certain number of leaves on it that actually look like tomato leaves, you'll have a better picture on the next slide. That's when you're going to want to repot, and hopefully you'll only have to repot this plant once, especially in a nice big pot like that. So when your seedlings start to look like this, these are great seedlings because they're, I'm just going to turn the light off so you guys can get a nice visual of that image there. So these plants were growing under a plant light. They're about 2 inches tall, but they have lots of little tomato leaves on the top that actually look like tomato leaves, and we call these true leaves. This is when you're going to want to transplant them, because at this stage they're starting to get a little too big for their pots. Now, because you're growing these in these awesome compostable pots, you don't actually have to take them out. You just have to put that pot in a bigger pot. And when you're transplanting them, the bigger pot you put them in, it can be plastic, because at that stage the plants are so big, they can survive getting a little dry. They'll be fine, and you'll have cut down the weak number of plants, so you're only going to have, like, say, the 5 or 6 plants you want in your garden. It's not as energy intensive to water them. But the soil you want to put them in your bigger plastic pot, is real potting soil, because now that they're past that delicate seedling stage, they're going to want fertilizer in order to grow big and tall. And that's really the last big care thing you have to do, is stick those guys in the pot and then just basically keep them alive like a regular house plant until the spring. Now, if you do have problems with long, leggy tomatoes, tomatoes are kind of magical, because unlike most plants, they can grow roots anywhere on the stem. So if you take a plant that's like this tall, it only has leaves up here, you can actually take that whole stem, lie it down in the soil, horizontally like this, cover it with soil, and all this original stem will become root, and all of a sudden you have this tiny plant that has this massive healthy root system, and the plant that grows up from this will actually have a thick fat stem and be a healthy plant. So if you're getting a plant that's a little too leggy, get a big pot, plant it down deeper so that all this leggy stem that was just looked kind of ridiculous before can become productive root. And the plant that will grow up on top of that will be a nice thick stemmed tomato plant, and you won't have to do anything else to it.
Approximately how many weeks do you anticipate it to grow to 2 inches long?
It's varied every year I've done it, because I've made various mistakes along the way. But it's usually within about 3 weeks you should start looking at. But it's really the developmental stage it's at. If you transplant them too young, they just kind of freak out. Like they don't handle the stress very well. So another good cue is if you start seeing roots all along the outside of your pot, that's your plant being like, oh, I've run out of pots. That's probably another good sign that you can start planting them. It's really once they're past that delicate, I'm a seedling, anything that shocks me will kill me stage. And finally, just general care things. Again, once they're that big, you don't have to water them as much. You can keep them under the plant light as well. You can put them in the window at this point. They're not going to be trying to grow like crazy towards the sun. They're going to stay the size they are. And most importantly, people don't talk about this, but it drives me nuts. My grandfather taught me this about tomato plants. When you have one growing, tomato plants are strange in that they will try to form new little branches between each of their existing branches. And if you don't control these, that's how you get a nice little tomato plant that becomes this massive tomato bush that you can't control. It's just flopping all over the place. But it's really easy to just pinch these as the plant's growing. So it'll be a stem and a healthy shoot with leaves, and there'll be this little tiny dwarf leaf in the axil. If you don't do anything about that, that's going to become another branch, which is just going to get in the way. But while it's still that little leaf, you can just pinch it off really easily with your nails, and the plant will just keep growing up then instead of growing out into this big bushy form. So that's not really related to seeds, but I know it's a big problem that people have. So by the time May comes around, your plant should be garden center size and should be able to go right out into the garden, but I'm going to get to the one more step you have to do before that and a few slides later, because it's a big step. So the melons you have, all melons, cucumbers, and squashes can be grown the same way. They're all in the same family. They have very similar growth conditions. They're great for that. You want to start these indoors about a month before the date that you expect to plant outside. So when the frost is gone, because melons and cucumbers and squash are really frost sensitive. So usually around late April is when I get started, because if they're in the pots for a few more weeks, it won't really hurt them. Because they're unlike the tomatoes, it's not a big deal. There's no light. They just grow sideways. They're vines. But the big thing with cucumbers, so the melons, the cucumbers, and the squash, is that they need heat at the bottom of their pots in order to germinate the best. If you don't have heat, they will still germinate. I've seen my friends do it, but if I put heat underneath them, they germinate in like a week. It's like magic. They just come up automatically. And you don't need to get something really fancy or expensive in a garden center. You can just put them on a little heat pad, a waterproof heat pad, for a couple hours, just so there's a little bit of heat down there. I've seen people put strings of lights underneath a mat and put the plants on top of that because it provides a little bit of heat. And I know Nature Pet Center sells heat pads for their reptiles and things that I've used for gardening purposes. You can really do that very easily without having to spend a lot of money. And actually, heat tends to help all plants germinate, but it really makes a big difference in the melons, the squashes, and the cucumbers. So you do have some melon seeds right there. You can start right now. The only thing about starting them this early is that you might have to repot them once because you might get too many roots on the outside that might look a little bit silly. Or you might want to wait until late April when there's less work involved because the plant you put in the garden that has 2 months of growth and the plant you put in that has 1 month of growth will still mature approximately around the same time. The difference isn't as dramatic as tomato. I know because I've done both. I've been lazy some years and I haven't been lazy other years. So melons, because they're bigger seeds, except for there's one that has little tiny seeds. This does not apply to the one that has tiny seeds. Yeah, which one is that called? Pepino is tiny seeds. This rule does not apply to that, but generally the bigger the seed you're planting, the deeper you want to put it because the stronger it is. So these, general melon seeds, cucumber, squash seeds, you want to put them 1 inch deep. Those little pepino seeds, I only put about 1 centimeter because you don't want them to have to put too much effort in pushing all that soil over when you're pushing up. So you can plant some now, even just plant one to see what it's going to look like when it comes up and experiment with it a bit because you still have some other seeds. So I know people want to plant any melon seeds now. Go ahead.
Do you plant 2 together or 3 together, same
Yeah.
as before? Always the same?
Yeah, general rule, anytime you're planting seeds, even outside in the garden, put more than one. Especially even if you put one and then it doesn't germinate, then you have this hole with that big in it.
Does it matter if we place the seed?
No.
Quality of seeds.
Sorry?
Quality of
Do you want
seeds.
some sugar baby, watermelon?
Around,
No.
so.
Because I don't have an outlook on it.
I thought you had corn seeds with Dollarama ones. I had one Christian ones and more, and I didn't want more, so I assumed they wouldn't grow, so I bought it from Dollarama. And they actually grew, but I wouldn't rely on them. I definitely think they're probably cheap, and they probably are expired seeds from somewhere else. I really wouldn't trust Dollarama. But the catalog I mentioned at the end of the presentation, a lot of these companies have been in business for a long time, so their seeds are very well sourced. And they're
You don't breed your own seeds like
absolutely, yeah, a lot of people do that. It's
tomatoes.
tomatoes, the way you can start to try to do that is you want to know which plants are going to the hybrid. So what you do is you wait for it. So you're crossing 2 different types of tomatoes. You're getting a brand new type that's a cross of the 2. We call it a hybrid. In order to make sure you're doing that, you want to watch the 2 flowers just open on the 2 plants and take a paintbrush and swish it around one of the flowers and then shoot it over and swish it around the other flower. What you're doing is actually pollinating that flower. And then put something around that flower, like it's harder for tomatoes, but I used to put a pantyhose just to keep bees from coming in and bringing other pollinators or any other pollen from getting to that flower because you want that flower to just be a mix of this variety and the variety you have. And then save the seeds from that, and that'll be a new hybrid.
Well, there's like a pepper. It has seeds.
Absolutely, yeah, I do that a lot. Yeah, a lot of people who sell seeds, that's the only way they keep them. Tomatoes are less fun because there's all this squishy red stuff around. You actually have to soak them in water to let the gross red stuff kind of disperse and get off of it. Pepper seeds are really easy, but peppers you have to let the pepper get soft on the vine in order for the seeds to be mature. If you pick a pepper when it's edible, the seeds won't be mature. You have to let it go all gross and squishy on the plant in order for the seeds to be their optimal viability. Mm-hmm. You just leave it on constantly. Basically, once the seeds have germinated, you don't really need to leave it on anymore. I usually do just because I'm kind of lazy. Yeah. The heat doesn't hurt them. It helps them. That's actually when seeds are triggered to start germinating in the soil is when the soil gets warm, not when the air gets warm.
I don't have an outdoor garden,
Mhm.
so if I'm trying to plant something just on my balcony, melon would be too big, right?
do it. What you have to do is you can't just let it go wherever it wants
Yeah.
as it grows up. What I do, well, I've grown cucumbers and beans. I trellis it to the metal bars of my balcony.
Okay.
So as it's growing, it's trapped in there. You just have to watch as the melons grow. You have to make like a little hammock with some rags underneath them so it captures the melons. But you can grow them in an apartment space.
But how big a pot are we talking about if I'm get
Melons,
something for my balcony?
Tomatoes don't care. Melons,
Yeah.
I'd get a big fat pot and fill it with like almost pure compost and manure. Melons really like, melons, cucumbers, squash really like very organic soil. Like if a cow took a poop, you could plant a seed in that poop and it'd be like the healthiest melon or squash or cucumber plant you can imagine. I mean, they just really like compost and manure. And sorry, do you go ahead?
You said before when you pick a pepper, like you can't use the seed for planting.
You can. Some of them will be viable, but it's not the majority.
And does the plant, would the pepper, for example, have to stay on the plant to mature? You couldn't pick it and then just let it?
No, the fruit will ripen, but the resources stop going to the seeds, so, yeah. If you guys have any more questions like that, just feel free to ask me, because I've been doing that for a while. So another thing that's great about these pots, all cucumbers, maybe it's because they don't form a lot of roots like the tomatoes do. Whenever you try to plant them, when they're not in one of these pots, they just like fall apart. And the root ball falls apart and you get this little stem with all these little roots. It's like, oh God, how am I gonna transplant this? Like I've totally destroyed it. So there's this myth that they don't like having their roots touched, but it's really that they're just so sensitive because they have so few roots that it's always best to keep them in a pot like this. So keep them in that. Even if the roots start growing all on the outside, doesn't matter. Keep them in that, because that you can just stick right in the soil. You don't have to disturb their root ball, and the plants will be able to take off right away. They won't be stressed because all of their roots have just been exposed to the air. So after a month, you're going to start off with something like this. You'll get a couple of real leaves like that, and then by the time you're putting these in the ground within a month, you should have several leaves, and even sometimes I've had little flowers start, especially on the squash, which is really exciting to see. And melons, it's actually less so with cucumbers and squash. They're going to start producing right away. Melons, especially watermelon, you want to start them early because they're not cold climate plants. They need a longer growing season than what we have available to really get all of their growth in, because like watermelons are native to Africa. They're not cold season plants. So even the watermelon variety I've given you, Sugar Baby, is considered to be the best suited for Canada because they're small, so they can mature an entire watermelon in our growing season because they're not creating this like giant 10-pound melon that takes many more months to actually mature. So beans and peas and lettuce and radish, even though these are, beans and peas are closely related, lettuce and radish have nothing to do with beans and peas, but these all have very similar growing conditions, and I love them because you do not have to start them inside. You can, I have done it before. Lettuce, it seems to do well. Radish, nope. Beans and peas, they'll grow great inside. As soon as you put them out in the garden, they will die. I do not know why it happens. Other people have reported it. They don't handle transition well. But if you put them in the ground around late May, leave the seeds in there, even not even late May, mid-May, because as soon as the soil warms up to a point where the seeds can germinate, they will germinate. They'll be the first things sprouting up in your garden in the spring, even before you put the tomatoes in, and they'll be very happy. And especially radishes and lettuce, they actually need cooler temperatures in order to taste best. If you try to grow lettuce in the summer, not only will it taste awful, but it might actually go to seed, which means the lettuce will taste really awful, and you actually won't even have a lettuce. You'll have this big log of noxious flower stalk with little seeds on it. And radish also, if you let it grow during the summer, radish takes a month to mature, and you don't really need to grow it all summer, but if you choose to, it's going to taste like wood. It'll look like a radish, but it will taste like wood. It's really gross. Beans like you have there, as I said, you can try growing some now. You have a lot of seeds. See how it grows indoors. You can see what your bean plant is going to look like. So when you start these outdoors in the spring and summer, you know what's happening. You know what it's going to look like. Because you have a lot of seeds there, you have a chance to experiment. Maybe you will have success transplanting them outside, where I have only failed. So like these guys, I prefer to plant outside, because then nature takes care of them. You don't have to water them. You don't have to repot them. You don't have to fertilize them. They take care of themselves. So plant in spring, mid-May. These are bigger seeds, and because they're outside, you want to put them a little bit deeper so you're protecting them from ants and cutworms and other little critters that like to eat seeds. So you want to put them about an inch deep. Again, 3 seeds in each hole in case 1 or 2 don't germinate, and even I usually get pretty lazy with the ones outside, even though I put a lot of seeds in one hole. I don't really prune them because there's a lot more resources in a big outside vegetable plot than there are in a tiny pot, so it's less detrimental to their growth. And they will stay dormant until the conditions are actually right on the outside for them to grow. So even if it's freezing and you put your seeds in the ground, the seeds won't die. They just will stay dormant. And I've actually had pea plants come up in my garden year after year because I can't seem to find all the seeds, and they just survive the winter and keep coming up year in, year out. Now, carrots are the most unique out of all the ones we're talking about today. I don't really have any other ones I can think of that are planted like carrots, except maybe grass seed. If you look inside your carrot packages, which I don't recommend actually because I don't have any tape to tape it back up, but you can see here, these are the seeds. They are tiny. They are extremely tiny. So you actually, when you're planting these, you don't want to dig a hole because they're so small. Most people just like to spread them right on top of the surface of the soil, like grass seed almost. And once they germinate, it's not a problem. The roots take hold, and they do great. Anytime I've tried to plant these under soil, they've always done very poorly, actually. They're also difficult, if not impossible, to start inside. People have done it. I found this picture on the internet, so I know someone out there has tried it. But because they're so small, they're such a pain to keep track of in your little pot, and it doesn't really, you don't really get a lot of benefits for starting carrots indoors. You can start them outside in the spring very easily, and they'll mature by the end of the season. You don't have to do anything special. And if you start them in pots, you actually might risk, if they're in there too long, stunting the carrot. Root plants, especially the carrots that grow very long, if there's anything in the soil impeding their downward growth, the root won't grow longer, it'll just stop. So like if you try to grow carrots in clay soil where it's very thick, the carrot will like grow at the surface and it's like we're a little ball. It won't try to go any further because the soil is too thick, it can't actually penetrate it with its root. So that's when you get weird little carrots that are split and stunted like this. Even if it's in a pot like that, if its root reaches the bottom, it may trigger it to just be like, oh, I'm not growing down anymore, I can't, I'm just going to grow outwards this time, and I'm just going to grow all these useless side roots, which we don't need. So these guys don't like frost, so don't plant them at the same time you're planting the beans and peas. When you're putting your tomato plants in the garden, that's a great time to put the carrot seeds in, because actually carrots do great around tomatoes. They tend to, the gardening myth is, this companion planting myth is that tomatoes tend to keep pests off carrots and the carrots tend to keep pests off tomatoes. I've never experienced that, but the carrots I have always do great when I put them under my tomatoes, so I've always done that. So just spread it over this person has done little holes in there, she will fail. This person is just sprinkling seeds on top of the soil surface, like you'd be sprinkling grass seed, although a little more space between the seeds. And they'll come up like that, and you'll have a whole bunch of carrots growing in one spot. You may want to pull a couple up if they're right next to each other, but as long as you spread them out, it's not normally a problem. The only thing you have to watch out is if you are, when you're planting your carrot seeds, make sure there's not going to be a torrential downpour the next day. Because if you have a big rainfall before these seeds have a chance to establish, you can risk them all getting washed away, which has happened to me a couple of times. But if you have a raised bed where there's sides on each side to prevent the plants from getting washed away, the seeds from getting washed away, if that happens, you won't have a problem. It just mine's a big pile of dirt surrounded by other dirt. You were talking about rain in general. How does this apply in a more tropical climate where there's going to be a big rainy season? Is it better to plant them after the rainy season or before, or? Depends on the plant. Okay. And the length of the rainy season. Like, are you talking about like a 6-month period?
No.
Or? Okay. Don't plant tomatoes then. Tomatoes are really vulnerable to a lot of diseases caused just by humid air. Actually, a lot of things don't do well in humid conditions. These are a lot more temperate plants. I really recommend planting them more in a dry season, because I think like tomatoes get things and squash and cucumbers get things. And humid, like, well, the past summers we had those like solid month of rain. The past couple summers, that has like just destroyed entire vegetable gardens, because that 1 month period is just long enough for every single vegetable plant in your neighborhood, and therefore all your neighbors' plants also to get like the same disease. So there's things that do great in tropical climates. I'm not too familiar with them. I don't think sweet potatoes is great in those conditions, but I haven't tried growing them myself. Yeah. Okay, and this is actually the hardest part of doing all this, if you can believe it or not, because you see the plants that you've been growing inside, all year can't go directly outside because you've been growing these little things in a house where, you know, the sun is filtered through the glass and there's no wind, all the air is still and serene, and you're suddenly going to be putting them outside in bright sunlight where there's severe wind. It will actually kill a lot of your plants outright, if not shock them so severely that they don't actually grow very well within the next couple of weeks. So in order to overcome that, you do this procedure called hardening off. And all the garden centers do this with your plants before you buy them in the field. So anything that's started indoors, you have to do this. And it's a gradual acclimatization of your indoor plants to the outside. And I don't like it because it takes like about 2 weeks, and it's a gradual process. Over the period of 2 weeks, you have to, say the first day, you put your plants outside in the sun for an hour, and then take them back in. And the next day, it's a couple more hours. And then by the end of the week, you're leaving them outside overnight and in the sun all day, and they're fine. And then you can put them in your garden with no problem whatsoever. But you really have to break them in gently to the sunlight. And your plants will tell you if you're doing it too quickly or not. This, if you can see here, this is it's actually not a tomato. It looks like a tomato, but the leaf is yellowing. If that's happening, it's that your plant is actually getting sunburned because the sun is too strong. So it hasn't built up that resistance to the sun yet. So you know, okay, maybe I should back off the hours of sunlight for like a day and then bring it up slowly. And if your plants are getting wilted like this, that's actually just from the wind. The wind is blowing so strong, the plant isn't used to it, and it's actually sucking the moisture right out of the leaves with the wind. Because plants have these little guard cells on them where they actually close them to keep the moisture in the leaf, but they've never had to do that before because there's no wind. Their leaves won't be used to it. They won't have developed this strength in their little cells to do that, so you need to give them a little while to do that. And actually, when I find that it's the most convenient to go through this hardening off process is when you start cleaning up your garden in the spring. So you'll be out somewhere for an hour. You can put the plants somewhere and you can watch them for an hour, so in case anything happens, especially the first day. And then put them back in and start doing it further and further. And even though I say 1 to 2 weeks, I've squished it down to a week. I usually get pretty impatient with them. So as long as they're not burning in the sun and they seem to survive, you know it's not going to get too cold overnight, you can usually put them in your garden. And even if you've done it too early and frost is coming and you're freaking out, just go outside to where your plants are. If you put them in the ground, put a pot over them or like half a 2-liter Coke bottle cut off, and you'll create a little greenhouse that you keep the temperature just warm enough inside that little space to keep frost from hitting your plant and to allow it to survive if you bad frost. Because we had frost in June a couple summers ago, which was, oh, I had a panic attack. I just put everything in. So these are my 5 rules for planting success, because there is a lot of information here, and I didn't write a lot on my slides, but that's because I'm sending these to you guys afterwards. I want to make sure you have something to read, not just pictures where I've taught. But these are the 5 rules. Know when to plant, save yourself the time. Know how to plant to get the greatest success. Always plant more than you need, because it'll make things easier for you. Don't feel bad to pull up the struggling plants. They were kind of weak to begin with. You don't want those genes in your gene pool anyway. And keep it simple, because this can be as complicated or as simple as you want to make it, and you'll still have the same level of success. It'll just be the effort you put in order to get that success. So this presentation will be sending to you guys. And I'm just going to now get the list of this great, a couple people have asked me where to get organic seeds. There's an amazing catalog that is put out every couple of years. You can get it off Amazon. It's a list of all the organic seed producers in North America, from Canada and the United States. But the catalog isn't ordered by the producers, it's ordered by the seeds. So you can look up the tomato chapter and look up the black tomato chapter, and there'll be like 200 different varieties of black tomatoes. They'll all have names, and they'll be like, oh, this is particularly sweet, this is great for salads or stuff like that, and then they'll actually have codes where you can find out which companies in North America will ship you that particular variety of seed. And you can spend like hours just looking through this catalog. The Montreal Botanical Gardens also has a great seed exchange every February, so unfortunately it is already passed. But at the beginning of February, it's called the Seed Exchange. The Botanical Gardens, all these growers across Quebec and Ontario will come, and you can buy organic heirloom seeds right there in the Botanical Gardens, which is much nicer because you can see the varieties there, and you can really ask people questions about them, because the people who grow the seeds and collect them are the ones they're selling them. So I'm just going to get the catalog name and watch it look it up. Does anyone else have any questions while I'm in the room?
I seem to have trouble with my carrots, because I plant them and they grow nicely, and then the next day I come out, they go eagerly this time, and then I come out and they're
cutworms.
Oh.
Those are my arch nemesis. Here, I'll Google cutworm on. This is something you will all encounter if you do vegetable gardening.
What do you do for that?
I can teach you catworm.
But we'll probably have to send them the catalog name, Christy, because it's
Okay.
12:30.
If you see this in your garden, this gross little brown thing,
Yeah, I've seen those,
yeah, they're called cutworms. They will be your bane. They're called cutworms because all they exist in life to do is they come up from the soil at night and cut your plant off right at the base of the soil, and then don't eat it, and then go away. They're little jerks. If you have the plant you're growing is a stem, the easiest way to take care of them is to take a little aluminum foil, wrap it around the stem, and then stick the end of the aluminum foil a little bit into the soil. So when the worm is crawling along the soil, it won't find your plant stem because they're really lazy. Like they don't crawl up the stem. They'll just the worm will come up and your stem will be like this, all covered, and it'll only go this far, and you'll be like, oh, where's the plant? And then it'll move on. Or with carrots, or plants that are more leafy, so you can't really wrap aluminum foil around them, take styrofoam cups, which aren't the most environmentally friendly thing, a styrofoam cup around the plant. Because the cutworms come up at night from the soil and wander around looking for plants. So as long as they're not inside the cup already, they won't find your plant, because they'll encounter the cup, and then they'll just move on. They really don't climb up things. Even though they look like caterpillars, they're soil-dwelling
Okay,
worms.
I wonder.